All right, so now we're live with Building Benevolence. I'm so excited to be here today to talk to these three amazing women who are doing various things around the community. And I'm glad to have them together today to talk about this one really important topic. So I'd like to do some introductions here, and I may leave some things out, so apologies. Just, feel free to add to this. But in the bright green and yellow, which I'm very envious of in this moment, is Laquisha Ewing. She is an author. She is a speaker. She is a coach, a counselor, a consultant. What does this woman not do? That is all through her company, Unlearn Everything and Live. She's also the founder of We Over Me, which is a collaborative community that was started in response to the pandemic, and also, I think, somewhat unexpectedly, to the tornadoes that happened here in the Chattanooga area. And so we're going to learn a little bit more about We Over Me and what that experience was like with her. Also, I know that you're an officer with Sankofa Fund. So
I'm a co-founder of both things. So not a full founder, co-founder of We Over Me with Chris Sands and Carmen Davis, and I'm a founding member of the Sankofa Fund.
All right, awesome. Well, Sankofa is really important in our community. You may have seen, they're very active on social media too with their efforts, and so you may have seen them kind of going around. And they do, mostly, they're a giving circle dedicated to supporting efforts to improve Chattanooga's Black community. So a lot of that kind of covers a broad range of different efforts and events and things that they're involved with. But we can talk a little bit more about that later. Also with us, we have Darlene Mew in the pretty blue. And Darlene is a licensed therapist. She's a psychology professor. She is also, and I am a big fan of this one, she's a co-host to the podcast, It's a Brain Changer, which I just love so much because you're actually talking about brain science and how we can use brain science and the latest in research and apply that to our own lives to make effective change for us interpersonally. So that's really cool.
Okay.
Yeah. And last but certainly not least, Melanie Silva, who is actually one of our award recipients for the One for All Awards. And Melanie she wears a few different hats. So she is an advisor for the Unfoundation. If you're not familiar with the Unfoundation, get familiar with them because they're a really important group that is giving small $3,000 a month micro grants to basically anyone in Chattanooga who wants to do something cool. So if you've got a cool idea, you can go through a very simple application process and fund your cool idea. She's also a board member of the Alice Fund. The Alice Fund provides money for surgeries for cats and kittens who desperately need it the most. So these are the animals who have been injured or have some issue going on, and they need some medical treatment for that. So we love the Alice Fund, and she's also the vice president of sales at Smart Furniture, which if you get a discount at Smart Furniture, then call me a jealous person because the furniture is amazing. So, and then I guess I should probably also introduce myself. I'm Nicole McDermott, and I'm a founder of the One for All Awards. I also refer to myself as the Jill of all trades because I often get called when it's like, Nicole, we have this idea and we need you to maybe help out and make this a realization here. And do you think you could do this? And I always say, sure. I'd love to do that because I love to challenge myself and try new things. And the latest new thing that I've been trying is getting this awards program off the ground. So it's been kind of a local grassroots movement to really just recognize and show our appreciation for people like these three women who are out in the community doing really great things. And we want to highlight that and give back in that way. So we've been doing that now for a few months, even though this has been in the works for, oh my gosh, coming up on a year now, I suppose. And so today I really want to talk about a topic that is really near and dear to my heart. And this, I think my work with the One for All Awards is why I was asked to do this panel. But I love people who are selfless, although giving back isn't always a selfless act, right? Giving back makes us feel good too. And we just want to continue to spread the love and figure out what are the ways or what are the best practices for getting people motivated in the community to continue to give back and to do as much as we can to help support people in the community that need it most. So I kind of want to start off, and again, if you want to add to your introduction, you're more than welcome to, but with my panelists, I'd really like to start off with maybe the question, what was an early life experience that you all had with giving? And I'll start with myself. So the one that I thought of immediately, because we certainly volunteered with our church when I was little, we certainly helped out with the canned food drives at school and did all the things that I think a lot of us, get involved in when we're younger. The normal things, the normal ways to volunteer and give back. But one example that I had very early on with giving back was through my mother. So my mother is a real gift giver. Like that is really her talent, is giving gifts to people. Now, I love this about her now. Of course, I loved it when she lavished me with gifts. But when I was a little kid, it was our job, myself and my brother, to give gifts to all of our teachers, our school bus driver, whatever activity that I happened to be involved in at the moment, whether it was a softball coach or a baton twirling coach or a piano teacher. Everyone that was in my life regularly during gift giving season was expected to, be given a gift at the holiday. And so for birthdays and Christmas or whatever it was. And it was always embarrassing to me a little bit, I have to admit, like having to give this really nicely wrapped present to my school bus driver, and I would be the only kid giving a gift to the school bus driver and to the teachers, and I was that kid. But the other thing that I noticed at a young age was just how it really affected the recipient of that gift, how it made them feel maybe seen. Because kids, right, we don't appreciate our school bus drivers, right? We don't always appreciate our teachers. And so, having to go through that act of saying, I see you, here's a gift for you. And then getting to feel that reward myself of making that person or being responsible for, making that person have a few minutes of happiness was really impactful to me. So I'd really like to hear from you all and what your early experiences with giving were. Laquisha, let's start with you.
Sure. So like you said, I have started along with friends that I would actually consider family, a couple of different initiatives here. And I think they're rooted in my early experience. So my youngest aunt, she's passed on, my Aunt Audrey. Her thing ever since, I can remember being a kid was if there was a hardship. So I grew up in Memphis. The house where we call it the family house, my grandparents' house sat on Taylor Street in Memphis, Tennessee. And so anytime there was a hardship, somebody was hospitalized or somebody passed away, my aunt would take it upon herself to go to everyone on the block and take up an offering, organize what we now know as the food trains, right? through the churches. Like, I mean, people do food trains all the time, right? But she started to do those things. And I just remember being younger and watching her mobilize what some would consider, a pretty poor neighborhood, but people were willing to give because it was such a communal thing. It's like one for all for one. And so regardless of how little I have something to give. And so everybody would give to these efforts to support whatever family on the block that was having the hardship or experiencing death. And so I guess I learned at a very, very young age that it didn't matter how much you had or what you had, everybody had something to give. And when you put those things together, that compounded interest, showed a love beyond measure. And so that's kind of been my brick, my foundation to how I operate. I don't think that there's anyone who doesn't have some value to offer. You may not have what we would consider monetary value, but your skills are without price. Your insight, your intellect, your lived experience, offers to a better solution solving for some of our nation's toughest problems. And so that's the way I look at philanthropy. That's the way I look at community work. Every voice matters.
Yeah, I love that so much. I remember I was interviewing Shaughnessy Cargill for our One for All award. He was a recipient, and he had said something you just said right there, Laquisha, which was, we all have something to give. We can all make an impact. Sometimes we think it has to be this like big organized thing. And it doesn't. It can be unique and special to who we are and to what our gifts and talents are. And that could be the thing that someone else needs in that moment. I think that's great. Melanie?
Well, I grew up in Hawaii, and the culture in Hawaii is centered around celebrating through wearing leis. And when I was a kid, I paddled canoe. Like, that was our kind of sport. And whenever we would race on the weekends, we would all walk around our neighborhood and find the flower trees, usually plumerias, and we would pick flowers and make leis for all of our teammates. And it wasn't centered around who won. It was, even if you came in last place, everyone on your team, and the canoe fits 6 people. And so you would make leis for all your other teammates, and you would celebrate coming together and working as a team. And whether you won or lost, you put leis on all of your teammates. And so it didn't matter. All you need is a needle and thread. And you don't buy flowers in Hawaii. You can go pick them. And they're everywhere. I lived across the street from an elementary school. And so we would just go down to the school, and there was, 8-10 plumeria trees that you walk past to get to school. So you just pick flowers and make leis and celebrate each other. So that was kind of ingrained in me from, I started paddling canoe when I was in 5th grade. So that's kind of my experience is really just celebrating coming together and working hard and putting your all into something, and then, celebrating through a lei.
I love that. And I love the visual that paints for me, because it's so different from the way that I grew up. It's there's such a stark contrast, but I love that. Thank you. Darlene?
So when that question was asked, it was really hard for me to choose because, I grew up in South Africa, and I grew up in South Africa during a time that was really turbulent. There was division in my country, based on race. And we were relatively poor. We were probably on the lower economic scale. And giving was part of what my mom and dad did. And it was a lot of giving of time and energy and gifts and your talents, as far as gifts are concerned. And one story that stands out to me, which I was debating whether to tell because it's kind of a difficult story, but it really, for me, giving has always been integrated in justice, in speaking up for people who can't speak up for themselves, for animals who can't speak for themselves, etc. I was about 9 or 10 years old, and my dad was working in the garden, and a Black man came to ask for food and for work. And my dad said, sure, come on, I'll work with you in the garden. And they spent all day working together, and we, gave food. And just as my dad was wrapping up to give the man money, police came, and they arrested the man because he did not have a passbook, which was what any Black person needed to be in the white area. And my dad almost went to jail. They wanted to arrest him because how dare he give somebody who doesn't have a passbook a job and food. And so it really was pivotal for me that giving is imperative, even if it means that you do it and you might get into trouble. That giving is something more than just giving something nice, which that's nice too, but you have to give yourself, your time, your energy to help the world be a better place and help people, especially people who can't speak for themselves or animals who can't speak for themselves. That's really was one of the strongest lessons I ever learned.
Wow, that's an incredible story. And that must have had such an impression on you at such a young age.
Yep, I was pretty scared, I will tell you. I really have nightmares for years afterwards thinking my dad was going to be imprisoned, But it made a big impact. My mom was kind of like that too. So we learned to go into danger and speak up, give yourself, give your time, give your passion, speak up, was kind of the way I learned to give primarily.
Love that. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. I want to jump into more pertinent questions, and the first of which is a little tongue-in-cheek, but I want to know what you guys think. Is Chattanooga really this special place where more people give back than, maybe your average place? That we're a place of givers and helpers, and, we go above and beyond here in Chattanooga, and we have that sort of understanding. Or do we just want to believe that we're special? Do we just want to believe that this is an altruistic place that we all get to exist in? Maybe there's some truth in both of those things, but I'd like to know what you guys think about that. And anyone who wants to have a thought, I can call on people, or we can just kind of roll with it.
I'll jump into that hot bullet, because that's a loaded question, right? If ever there were a loaded question, that's it. So I would say the first part of that is, so what we believe about ourselves, just because it may not be to the magnitude externally that it should be, doesn't mean that it's not true. So let me start there, right? Mm-hmm. So it could be, Chattanooga, when thinking about itself, of course, it's hard for you to see the water that you're in. Mm-hmm. So you really do see that, it's moving, it's doing well. I would say that Chattanooga, this session is called Building Benevolence. I think that Chattanooga has a very charitable attitude, more so than a benevolent attitude. And there's a difference, right? And so charity, unfortunately, charity sometimes perpetuates a hierarchical structure that there's always someone in the position to give. Yeah. Right. And so sometimes we become as a city, over reliant on our charitable functions, and that we have these infrastructures, these systems, these institutions that continually, like they were built on the backs of those who were the have-nots historically. And, the irony is these very same individuals are now being asked to write grants and, jump through hoops and tap dance to get the money that was made on the backs of the people that look like them. So there's that. So that's a charitable framework. Benevolence, in my opinion, looks a lot different. It's the thing that you want to do. It's not the thing that you feel like you have to do. It's the drive. So what I saw during the pandemic and the tornado, I saw Chattanooga switch from a charitable to a benevolent. I saw people at every level show up for a community, regardless of where you are. And so I've seen the heightened levels of our city's benevolence, unfortunately, at the most dire times. I was very close to the situation around the Woodmore bus crash, where we lost, the 6 children in our community. And what I saw again was a benevolence, not a charity. People that it didn't matter what zip code you lived in. It didn't matter what school your kids or grandkids went to. You had people from all over the community showing up, really all across the country, but in this community, showing up for one another through a lens of humanity. All the other stuff cast aside. I would like to believe that that's how we operate generally, but I'm not 100% sold. I feel that we are more charitable in our giving more so than benevolent.
And wouldn't you say that it's some of that charity that kind of fell through when the pandemic hit, and that's when We Over Me had to step in because there was that gap?
Yeah. So the thing about charity is that it's think about it in a business sense. It's a fixed cost, right? Mm-hmm. So those structures, those institutions only have so much that they can do. And so, that's not a slight. That's a reality. Like there are institutions historically that have done great work and that have, tried to reach the masses. So there's always going to be gaps. What we saw were the gaps, right? It wasn't really that, we were saying that people weren't showing up. That was not our heart at all. It was for even your best laid plans would not have produced and or garnered the type of resources that are needed to get things done, because some of these places where we were serving, the bigger institutions didn't even know they existed. Like right now we have populations of homeless or unhoused folks, but you don't think about them as homeless. And let me tell you why. They're the people who were staying with relatives and friends during the pre-pandemic, pre-tornado. The tornado comes, destroys the people's houses that you're living in. They go live with their family, and now you have nowhere to live. But you have a job. You work for big companies in our, in our city. So you have a job, you have a car, and we have a lot of people. They're living in their cars. They're living in extended stays, and they're the homeless by proxy because they were kind of sofa surfing with friends who lost their homes and had to be rehoused themselves, and they can't take you to their in-laws, and so. Right. That was the granular level that we saw a gap that we could fill, because that it was small enough of a population that people cared about it. It's not that they didn't care about it, but it was such a small populace, but such an important populace that maybe the bigger structures couldn't get to it because they were trying to stop the bleeding, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was gonna say that was a really good point about the difference between charity, being charitable, and benevolence, right? Because benevolence, like you said, is really about being here, being motivated and wanting to do something to help somebody else, to be there, right? To be present with somebody else. And that's a really interesting question that you started with, Nicole, because I think, how do you even compare, right? How do you even compare how well we're doing with any other group? Because we know there's unfortunately those statistics that if somebody steps up, 20% of the people do 80% of the work, right? And Laquisha, as you were saying, if there are charitable places or people give to charities, sometimes I think we feel like we're very benevolent because we're giving, but we're not really actually giving here necessarily. Good intentions probably, but it's easy to say, okay, I'm just going to give a donation to some kind of charitable organization, but it's different when it is like, am I motivated here in my heart to actually go in and do whatever it takes to be part of this community, to build each other up. And yes, during the pandemic and also tornadoes, it seems like those big events tend to shake people up a little bit more and say, come on, Chattanooga, get involved. But the question is, are we more benevolent in general, or do we wait for these big events or pandemics or crises to really, truly be benevolent?
And how do we do that, right? That's the thing, is like, how do we all come together and support each other and show up with love and or money without a pandemic, without a natural disaster, without a big, a depression or something terrible, right? And I would argue that at the core of that is equity. We have to all want to come together. We have to all see each other as valued members of our community. We have to be able to teach our young people empathy. I think bullying is a huge factor in young people and especially young boys learning about, how to put yourself in other people's shoes and feel empathy. And I know I just opened up a huge can of worms, but I mean, whenever Laquisha's in the room, I'm generally writing notes and listening. So I figure I'd just open it up and let her chime in. But also, I think, Darlene, you're an expert in figuring out, okay, we have to practice these things. Yeah. We don't just become good at them. Your brain is wired to do the thing that takes the least amount of effort. That's how we survive, but that's not how we thrive. Yeah. And we have to figure out ways that we can practice this and teach other people and create new normals for ourselves.
And that, to your point, Melanie, that is a very, that in itself is a very vulnerable place for us as a community, right? Because it means literally taking a mirror and looking at all of us, not some of us, right? Like looking at all of who we are, and building something. And so the thing about building from the inside out means that on the external, you may have to relinquish something for the sake of the greater good, right? So it was benefiting you individually. So charity says, I get to keep all the things I have, and I'm just going to give this piece, right, as an act of a general act of kindness. Mm-hmm. In a quote that I often use, I tell people, I said, charity is, I'm sorry that you're naked and have nothing to eat. Mm-hmm. Here's a sweater. Here's a chicken box, right? Benevolence says, come to my table. Let me explain to you how I cook this. Let me show you how I got this food. Let me show you how to make this sweater. Let me then give you something that's going to allow you to build something that you don't have to come back to me again, right? You don't have to, like, you actually have given people the tools from the heart because you want to see their situation eliminated, not pacified, right? And so to Melanie's point, when you're talking about equitable benevolence, right? So we're going to coin a phrase here, equitable benevolence, equitable.
Writing it down.
Yeah. Equitable benevolence.
Can I have a t-shirt, please?
Yeah. Equitable benevolence, basically, you create a structure by which those people who have once were those who were given to are now, over some period of time, they become the people that can become the givers. If I'm always in the position to need help, then you're giving me a charitable thing that is appeasing, your desire to recognize that I have lack, but it's not doing anything to fix my situation.
Yeah, and I think that it's so.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Laquisha jumping in there because Melanie, what you were saying about like starting early, and I'm a little brain science geek. For those of you who know me, I love the brain science component of things. And if you think about it, in our very base core level, we learn through sensory experience, right? And the repetition of those experiences create the meaning or the structures or the constructs or the associations that our mind makes. And once those things are set in place, those superhighways, we kind of ride along on those superhighways because it's easier for our brain to do that. And so if you're giving charity and like you said, Laquisha, and somebody looks down on somebody, because it kind of comes with that idea of I've got more than you, you're lacking in some way. And maybe that's very harshly put, but in some ways it's kind of like that at times, right? Then we do have to start really early on in creating different kinds of sensory experiences for our really young people, right? Starts early, where the associations are of we're equal here, we're all valuable, like you said, right? And those continued experiences that we have where we can come together as a community and being one as a community, and all equal, that will strengthen over time, so that by the time those kids who've experienced those things, those experiences of giving and being part of a community, by the time they're teenagers, adults, now it's much more natural for them to be benevolent and to be because now the association, the construct is totally different, right? Within which they're functioning. It is not a us and them, or I have, you don't, I'm going to give you something because that makes me feel better.
That was one reason too, Nicole, why we started the Sankofa Fund. So of course, there's always this focus, on Black and Brown communities that's at the core of what we do. But if you look at the structural, what we said was that I want you, before Sankofa, to name a fund, a philanthropic entity that was comprised of African Americans as givers, and that was the sole purpose, right? And so part of the existence in the ecosystem of philanthropy in our city was to show that people of color are givers. Matter of fact, if you look at the studies, I want to say it was a Kaiser study, it actually showed that people of color, primarily African American folks, gave on a percentage basis, gave more, even though they made less than some other ethnic groups, gave on a percentage basis more of their income, to the point of upward to a few $1 billion annually.
And women too. I would argue, I don't have the data on that, but I would argue that it's women who are doing more as well.
Yeah. So that I don't know, but I would agree with that. But I think that we need to have that representation at minimum in the conversations, so that then to Darlene's point, you start to reshape the constructs and the narratives around who are the benefactors and who are the beneficiaries, right? Of the philanthropic giving. And the more you change it, it's like, now we're getting close to what Darlene said, everyone can be viewed as a giver and as a recipient, right? And so not just one class or race of people.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So that kind of leads me into this other question I wanted to tap into. So I had mentioned in a message to you guys, I know that big brothers, big sisters, they're always, this is an example we can use. Okay. They're always struggling to get volunteers to be a big brother, be a big sister. And I had a good conversation with someone who does do some volunteering there. I was a big sister back, I think I started in 2007. And even back then in 2007, they were just struggling to get men to be big brothers. It's not that they weren't still having trouble getting women as well, but it was a much larger gap in getting male volunteers. And I find in my own personal life that many of the men that I know that volunteer or give back in other ways are, because I know it's not all about, we use this word volunteering. We could probably have an hour conversation about that word. We won't. But I find that even in my personal life with friends, with men that I know that give back, this is not all of them. I know some fabulous men who put me to shame, as far as giving goes. But a lot of them, it seems like they're involved because their wives are involved, or their wives are pushing, and so I feel like there is this disparity between, men and women giving. I don't really want to make the whole conversation about that, but that's one example of ways in which we have some people who are more reluctant to get into that space, to get into the space of volunteering or giving back or helping someone out. And so how do we change these, like what's socially normal, right? Because that's the goal, is to change what is socially normal around giving and getting involved, getting your hands dirty. So how do we change our social norms around volunteering and serving in the community?
have to think about that one.
Well,
I'm trying not to start everyone.
I have some of my own thoughts because, I'm not a behaviorist per se, but I studied a lot about behavior psychology when I went through my apprenticeship program for dog behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's all based in the same things. Dogs, humans, it's all the same for the most part. And then also I was a PhD student for a time, and I had to take some behavior psychology as part of that requirement. And what I was always told, and Darlene, you can, chime in. What I was always told is that if you want to get people to change their behavior, that it really needs to be a multi-pronged approach, right? Because, we know that punishment works. It's not always ideal, and it comes with a lot of unintended consequences, but we know that it can work. We know what's often more effective is positive reinforcement. And but at the end of the day, it's usually a combination of some of these different approaches that gets you to actually change behavior.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff. I'm trying to make it as short as possible because I can get on a lecture here about how the brain is wired and attachment. But I think that it's definitely influenced by the cultural norms, right? Because cultural norms will affect parenting, and parenting in itself will affect cultural norms. And if we think about how, just a short little thing about how I think conscience and compassion develops, right, is that, we are not born with conscience necessarily, right? That it's that connection, that attachment we make with our primary caregivers that creates the foundation for us to start feeling, right? So that if I'm really connected to somebody like my mom or dad, then when that person is feeling pain, I'm going to start feeling their pain, right? So that feeling of pain that I feel when my parent or my primary caregiver is feeling pain, then can start generalizing to the greater community, right? To my friends, to animals. But if I don't have that strong connection with that person, that first primary caregiver, it's much harder for me to feel pain for anybody else, right? Because I don't develop that connection with, this thing, when I'm doing this is hurting somebody that I care about. And then that creates conscience. And then ultimately what I'm always looking for is we want to develop that beyond that to compassion, right? Because compassion is we wanting to develop, I think, an internal locus of control where it isn't so based on rewards or punishment, because even those two are the strongest motivators we have, right? Is avoiding the punishment that we get if we're not doing something, or the reward we get when we do something that feels good. Ideally, we want to move towards where it becomes an internal drive. So how do we get there? Well, it is a multi-pronged approach because it's more than just rewarding people in some way when they're doing something charitable or benevolent or volunteering. It's also going to have to be about maybe educating, right? People on all these levels, that if you want your children and your more men to be involved, we've got to somehow create education for parents, maybe for the community, and those people who are already doing that, who have that internal locus of control, mentoring, creating these spaces where it can be learned, right? But ideally, we want to start, you can see I'm going back to the child, right? We want to start making that such a part of where it begins, right? So that it becomes an internal locus of control and doesn't have to be rewarded or punished if it's not happening in any way. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Okay. That's a lot of stuff there. Yeah.
So, go ahead.
No, just real quickly, I don't know how you teach grown-ups empathy. I think that's a really, really hard thing to do.
I'm through it.
Yeah.
Plug.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I too agree that it has to come from we have to. I'm married to a social worker, so I know what ACEs are, and adverse childhood experiences that are tied to traumatic events as a child, even as simple as being hungry or having one parent, or lots of different factors that go into those numbers, and figuring out how do we not have those? How do we prevent them? How do we support and love these young people that are going to grow up to be givers and movers and shakers and taking care of us as we age? And that's a whole panel in itself. But I agree with you. I do. There's so much there.
Well, yeah. Maybe that is with the. Go ahead, Laquisha.
No. I was going to shift. So go ahead and finish your comment.
I was just going to say that since we are talking about big brother and big sister, right? And maybe that is one of the places. These organizations like you guys have put in place, organizations that already focus on changing the experience of a child, right? Boy or girl. What you're creating there is already an environment that maybe we might not see the full effects yet now, but you're creating that space where we know, even though, yes, you form that connection early on in life, we can rewire these things later on, right? We can rewire learning compassion. It takes a little bit more work, but if you're having volunteers already, even if there's a disparity between men and women, for example, right? They're already creating these environments where these kids are experiencing something else, right? That is creating a new experience that hopefully will create these shifts and changes for them to be wanting to give and to be benevolent and be involved and volunteer in the future because they're experiencing it differently, was the one thing that came to my mind.
So I agree. I think a lot of focus with my fellow colleagues here on this panel was on kind of growing the next generation, almost foregoing the fact that we have a current set of men. Yes, I do believe that we can start with the young people and definitely try to reshape some of their experiences so that we actually, by the time we get to the point where we're asking for volunteers, we've created a more healthier, mentally healthy, emotionally healthy population to draw from. But I think I would be remiss if I did to not mention the fact that mentorship, volunteerism, and benevolence are all luxuries.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. These are these are luxury things. And so when you think about the societal ills that Chattanooga is not exempt from, and you think about how people have constructed mentoring in the past, it was always, some tenet in the mentoring structure that you had something in common with the person, with the young people, particularly since we're using big brothers, big sisters. You needed to have something in common with the people, build that relationship with those young people through what you guys had in common. And so just kind of taking some of the other, natural, cosmetic, external characteristics off and finding that common balance. Well, what does that look like when you have a whole population within our community that's just trying to keep a roof over their head and trying to keep their own child or children, off the unbeaten path, right? What does that look like? And so I think that there's a little bit of luxury in volunteering in general, because it's not that people don't want to, it's because they don't have the ability to. I tell people I don't have to do anything. I get to do everything I do because I understand the life that I've been afforded. It gives me spaces to be benevolent. It gives me space, because if I had to work a 9 to 5 or 2 or 3 9 to 5s, which is, we have populations 37404, 37406, where African American women in that particular zip code, they're making less than $15,000 to $18,000 a year, like annual, right? It's not that I don't want to mentor. a young lady. I may actually have the heart to want to pour out maybe some of my story to help you, see how to make better choices. The reality is I can't show up because I have to work these two jobs for the livelihood. So I don't want us to brush over the fact that some of the times you don't have the volunteer pool that you need because people are just trying to survive out here. Yeah. And it's not the desire not to show up. So then you have to look at the other side of that coin when you think about those who do get to show up, going back to Melanie's point about equity, right? So those people who do get to show up because their life affords them a space for benevolence through the lens of volunteering, then to Darlene's point, have we properly educated and equipped them to show up? But all of these things are layered. They're not either or, they're and. Right. And so how do we get more males? I don't think, as a society, we really haven't put men into a space in socialization that requires them to examine their emotional intelligence. EQ is totally new, I think, to a lot of people, but definitely to men, right? So I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna produce. I'm gonna do my thing, not even really examining how my verbiage, my body cues, are really, shout out to Donna Van Natten with her body language books, showing us how we can, communicate without verbally communicating. A lot of males aren't. And so volunteerism and mentorship, especially through Big Brothers, Big Sisters, is asking a populace, a gendered part of our society, men, to tap into something that basically they've been asked to repress. Men are providers, men are this, men are emotional relationship builders. Yeah. They're the club the animal and bring it home kind of all of that narrative, all of that narrative that we push into our society through socialized messaging. Yes, it's still prevalent. And so now you have to unlearn that. Again, that's my thing. But unlearn those things so that men do start to see themselves as, someone who can build a relationship and have something to offer on that emotional, relational level, with young people. And we'll see, we're seeing it. We're to Darlene's point. We're seeing, people educating, ACEs trainings, people understanding that trauma precludes people's ability to offer themselves because they feel like they don't have anything to offer. They feel broken. So that was a very long answer, but
yeah, to your point, I've just personally, I've seen a really big increase in the number of males as clients, therapists. As a therapist, I see more males. So there's definitely shifts happening, right? The messaging is changing. And these are not young males necessarily. Some of them are older, right? But yes, it's going to take much more. Oh.
So that leads me to kind of our final thought because we've got 5 minutes to wrap up here. But, I think there has been in the past this understanding or maybe just this acceptance that when we want things to change, and usually we want things to change, right, when there's some kind of friction happening, when something isn't working for us and we go, why is that like that? Why isn't that better? Why isn't that working for me better? And there almost seems to be this expectation that change is supposed to happen from the top down, that someone is supposed to change this for us. I don't know who that person is. Is it government? Is it just community leaders, people in charge, whoever they are? But there's another way of thinking about things. And I just kind of like to get your final take on this, about doing things from more of a grassroots level, starting change, enacting change from the bottom up. Do we need to wait for permission to change things?
Well, I mean, there are some things that government has to change. I mean, if the four of us stormed City Hall and took down all the photographs of the straight white men that greet you when you enter, we would not be in a good place after that happened. Yeah. But I would argue that there's, even more that we can do. Whether that's making space for people in meetings, helping unlearn some of these things that we've all learned, whether it's buying our daughters, trucks and our sons' vacuum toys, whether it's showing up for your PTA and or being a mentor or being, you can be whatever you want to be to those people around you, even if it's just smiling at someone in the grocery store. I mean, we can show up for everyone around us. But yeah, I do think there's some things that government has to do. We focus on our history versus, what our future can be. And I think that can be a tricky one. Should you have to show up for court and see someone who fought for, slavery to remain in place greeting you? I would argue that doesn't make me feel like what's going to happen inside is very just. So there are both.
Yeah.
I would agree. I think that it's a multi-pronged thing, right? Is that what do they say? A company's culture, right, is often really influenced by the people in charge, right? Whoever is the manager or the CEO, whatever, because we tend to naturally gravitate towards picking people who think like we do, right? And on the other hand, sometimes if you wait for the big wheel to turn, it turns really slowly. And so I think maybe it's one of those things where, like you said, Melanie, both are true, that we don't, for some things we absolutely probably will need to wait for government to step in, but there are other things that we have to do on a grassroots basis. Otherwise it won't change at all.
And I agree. I agree with what Darlene just said, for sure. So another hat I wear is I'm a Christian minister. Mm-hmm. So I tend to operate from divine direction more so than worldly direction. So on the actual natural side, I tend to ask for forgiveness more so than permission, because my directives come from a system beyond where we are sitting. And not to make this overly religious, but that's how I operate my life. I understand that there is a God that is higher than myself, that basically placed me here for a purpose. And so sometimes that purpose is to dismantle, and you can only dismantle from within. You can destroy from without, but you can only dismantle from within. And so, the other thing about dismantling is that you can dismantle and not destroy. And so what I realize is that yes, we can do things. We don't have to always ask for permission, because sometimes the things that you've been purposed to dismantle and get rid of, the power structure holds the key. And if you ask for permission, you'll never be able to fulfill your purpose. And so that's where I tap into my faith system. And I ask, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing right now? And so when you think about We Over Me, it came together, not because we asked the natural system for permission, but we all, Chris Sands, Carmen Davis, and myself, got together because God brought us together for a moment and showed us the blueprint. It's almost like Noah and the ark. He didn't ask, he built the ark, whether you believe it or not, right? He built the ark and the rain came, and everybody was glad that he built it, even without asking permission when the rain came.